Alright, so now we are on to foreign policy and the Cold War. So this is post-World War II, although it still relates directly to it. And we're going to discuss the changing relations of U.S. policy throughout the rest of the world due to the Cold War and our attempts to basically stop the spread of communism after World War II. So the Iron Curtain is a very famous speech by Winston Churchill, which he gave, oddly enough, at a Midwestern college that didn't really expect him to show up to give the speech. Like, he was invited to give the speech, and they was like, well, we'll send the invite, he won't come. And they said, yeah, I'll show up. And he showed up and gave this speech where he actually made reference to what he called the Iron Curtain, which was essentially a fictional representation of this idea that communism was just taking over and nothing was allowed in and out. And the big thing why he called it an Iron Curtain was because you couldn't see in either. A lot of what was going on in communist Russia and the USSR and the countries they had taken over and made into basically annexed parts of Russia, like Romania, Poland, that was behind lines, and you couldn't see it. And they wouldn't allow people in to see what communism looked like because they were trying to make communism look good, and the end result of communism was usually a bad situation where there was more poverty. All right, Cold War and containment. So the U.S.'s main priority after World War II and when the Cold War really kind of begins. And we call it the Cold War because there was never actually fighting directly between the U.S. and the Soviets, really. There was little hiccups here and there where there would be some conflict, but you never had like outright battles or anything. You had proxy wars, which you talk about in world history, like in Vietnam and South Korea and later in Afghanistan later on. But for the most part, it was a very cool war where there's always lots of threats. Everything was very menacing. People were always kind of scared that something bad would happen, but nothing really happened. But we'll notice there's sports involved with the Olympics, espionage, psychology, tech developments, atomic weapons, hydrogen bombs, regular atomic bombs. All this stuff plays a huge role during this time period. And it goes from the 1940s all the way to the 90s. So this is a long, long period of time for us to basically be kind of, sort of, not really at war with another major superpower, being the Soviet Union. All right, now containment was the policy that basically said stop the domino effect. Because when one country goes communist, it's like the next country next door will go communist, and then the next one goes communist. They were basically just trying to stop what amounted to these popular revolts by the working class, then basically take over, and then everybody be poor because the leadership just wasn't there to handle the communist government. It's one of those great phrases, communist is a great idea on paper, but once you factor in human greed, suddenly it stops working. That's communism under the USSR standard. And pretty much every practical application of communism ever in U.S. history has been, well, it looks good on paper, but then the people get in charge, and then they're abusive. They take all the money. They act very non-communist, and then it just falls apart. And they were trying to stop that from spreading. The Iron Curtain refers to this Eastern-Western European map, like this. There obviously was not a real Iron Curtain. It's just this iron curtain, this iron wall you can't see in and out of, that basically just has cut Europe in half, according to Winston Churchill. And this is a little cartoon about it. Basically, he's trying to peep into the Iron Curtain. That's Churchill down at the bottom. All right, and this is what the Iron Curtain, quote unquote, looked like. There obviously wasn't a real Iron Curtain, but that red line there, that is the cutoff point. Now, Yugoslavia is the only one outside that line. And they were communists, but they were just considered independent. So they weren't really controlled by Russia, but they got a lot of influence from Russia between money and everything else and political power. All right, the Marshall Plan, the goal was to stop communism by basically making communism not look nearly as good as capitalism. So they were basically trying to rebuild post-World War II Europe. And keep in mind how much of Europe was just destroyed by this war. Again, one of the big reasons why the U.S. kind of benefits after the war with our industry is because we weren't really attacked that much on the home front. We were not, like, New York never got attacked. Boston never got attacked. Michigan and their car industry, they weren't bombed. But all those places where they built cars, where they built major infrastructure in Europe had been bombed heavily. They were, like, a lot of, like, their car companies were just rubble. Rolls-Royce was a car company in Great Britain. They were decimated in many ways. So we were the only industrial power left, and Europe had to rebuild. And you'll know, based on world history, that any time a country is coming out of a major war, communism and socialism kind of seeps in because it's a great way to, because people are like, man, I'm disenfranchised, I'm working, and I can't make anything. All these fat cats are making all the money. And then they kind of rebel, join together. And communist parties, socialist parties were getting very big in Europe post-World War II. And this is kind of a way to stop it. And during this time period, huge amount of money got spent in various places inside of Europe in the form of loans from the U.S. and other countries because we wanted to basically build up Europe and show how great capitalism was. Hey, if you put money down and invest and create business, it'll pay back major dividends. And the Communist Party started to lose a lot of support as time went on, because the whole idea behind communism is sharing wealth. And what we did by basically giving a whole bunch of money to these various countries in Europe was say, hey, this is what happens when money is given and you invest it and take care of it. We couldn't do this in a communist society, so you should not vote communist. And over time, the Communist Party started to weaken. Now, the aims for the Soviets and the U.S. are very different from each other. The U.S. wanted to create a new world order where basically all the nations had the right to self-determination. Like, you could all choose what you wanted to be, but you had to have the choice. And the idea here is you want to avoid, like, the quote-unquote the Russian bear from coming in and saying, hey, you're communist now because we're taking over. That's what they're trying to avoid. They wanted to gain access to raw materials for industry, because there's a lot of raw materials in Western Europe, wood, lumber, iron, those various things. They wanted to rebuild governments in Europe because a lot of them had fallen apart. France's government had fallen apart because they were occupied. Spain was very weak. Italy had fallen apart because they were under Mussolini, who was killed by his own people after the war was over. Then they also wanted to reunite Germany because it was basically split in half between Western and Eastern Germany, and they were very weak. And they wanted to rebuild Germany up so they could participate in making the Western powers more powerful. On the Soviet side, they wanted to encourage communism because, hey, they were communists. They wanted to rebuild their economy because it was also very much destroyed. Russia lost 24 million people, lost more than anybody else in the war. They wanted to control Eastern Europe to balance out U.S. interference. In Western Europe, our interference was basically giving a lot of money. And they wanted to keep Germany divided and weak because they were still afraid that Germany might combine and then hurt the Soviet Union again. Because remember, they did it one time in World War I where they attacked the Russians, and they did it again in World War II after they said that we were going to be friends. They then break that treaty, and then they attack Russia again. So they were very interested in keeping Germany cut in half. All right, the Truman Doctrine was this: defend any nation against a communist takeover. The first application was in Greece and Turkey. So if we go back to this map real fast, you'll notice that Greece and Turkey, they are basically surrounded by communism. They got the USSR up here, all around them. And now you have it slowly encroaching on the northern side. They're basically just surrounded all the way through by this communist influence. So you have a big, big issue of Greek and Turkish forces being like, well, communism might work out for us. So they were trying to basically stop it from spreading into the Middle East early on with the Truman Doctrine. And then you got the Berlin Airlift. Now, we often hear it about what we call the Berlin Wall. Well, the Berlin Wall is literally East and West Berlin. It's cut in half, with the East Berliners being communist and West Berliners being capitalist. Now, here's the crazy thing. We had to do airdrops into West Berlin basically because the communists had blocked off all access. And this map will explain why all the access was blocked off. Berlin was squarely in the middle of East Germany, which was now communist. So this whole area, this Berlin Wall, was all just surrounded, and people tried to cross the Berlin Wall zone, try to get into these free areas, because once you got in, you were good. They couldn't do anything to you. People were trying to escape, and there was this just terrible time period. Like, I think over 150 people died trying to cross into West Berlin, trying to escape the communist side. And it was just a very nasty time period in history. Lots of propaganda happening. And this is very famous. Later on, Reagan, when he's president, says, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." He's talking about the Berlin Wall. All right, now we got to talk about the Chinese Civil War. All right, so we're talking about communism again, but we're talking about it in Asia. So what country is right next to China? Russia. It's a huge country. There's all kinds of influences going on. China was severely weakened by World War II. They were significantly damaged by the Japanese invasions that occurred. Very, very poor. Anytime, again, you have a third world country that's experiencing even worse times than normal, communism and socialism can kind of pop in and make people believe that their better lot, their best chance is to become communist. So there were communist forces and democratic forces. The communists won in 1945 under a guy named Mao Zedong. That's this guy right here. Now, here's the two major leaders. There's Chiang Kai-shek, and he was a nationalist, pro-democrat. He got a lot of help from the U.S. And then you got Mao Zedong on the right-hand side. He is the leftist. He's the communist guy wanting to basically make China into a communist country. The guy on the right won. They had better morale. They had highly motivated leadership, better trained soldiers. On the other side of things, with Chiang Kai-shek, leadership was very poor, the morale was low, and they just didn't have the stuff they needed to get the job done. All right, then we move on to the Eisenhower Doctrine. So Dwight Eisenhower becomes president, and his goal, much like the Truman Doctrine, is to prevent the spread of communism, but in this instance, prevent the spread of communism in the Middle East. Because again, you got Turkey, and just above this whole area, this is the area in contest that we're trying to basically worry about. We don't want to lose this area to communism. Right up here is Russia. This is Bulgaria. This area right here, this is Soviet Union right now. They're all basically right. They're ready to try to transfer in. Hey, let's make Turkey into a communist country, and it spread further and further and further. And this becomes an issue all the way into the late 20th century with Afghanistan, Pakistan, all these various areas that are really close to Russia, where they were really primed, basically be taken over by the Soviets and becoming communist and expanding out. One, this would be bad because we don't want to have more territory, but they were also had a lot more oil access. The U-2 incident, and not the band. This is when a spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960. So now they know we're spying on them. They really always knew we were spying on them, but now we got caught red-handed spying on them. Didn't look good. Increased a lot of the tensions at the time. And this is only 15 years after World War II ended. So everyone's still kind of like, ooh, is there going to be another war soon? Because World War II started 20 years after World War I ended. So we're not talking about a terribly long period in time here. This is pretty quick. Everyone's kind of like, could another world war happen in 5 years? Is this going to happen again? Are we going to go back to war all over again? Is this just rehashing history over and over and over? Everybody's kind of got that on their mind. And this is an actual image of the U-2 spy plane. Not the one that crashed, but just a U-2 spy plane. Very high altitude, can't be shot down typically, unless they fly too low. And then we got the hydrogen bomb. The hydrogen bomb is a nuclear weapon that was way stronger than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It increased the arms race exponentially because now Hiroshima and Nagasaki were big enough, like they were huge, did a lot of damage. We're talking about a bomb that could, like in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, destroy a good portion of the center of downtown, that area. This is a bomb that could just destroy a city. Like, it would just be nothing left. The fireball could incinerate a city and just destroy everything inside of it. We're talking about huge weapons here. Things that were like, would be just the amount, there's a term that comes out based on the Holocaust called a nuclear holocaust because it just would destroy everything. Massively powerful weapons. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. These guys are convicted in 1951 of giving the USSR, the Soviet Russia, secrets of the atomic bomb. They first exploded one in 1949. So they got basically the technology from these guys and secrets about making nuclear bombs. And then within 3 years, 3 years before they were convicted, they were able to make one. So these guys basically released the information sometime in the mid-40s. And then in a few years, they blew up. The Russians were able to test a successful bomb. And then they were convicted in our courts later on in the early 50s. All right, U.S. military intervention. This is a modern image, but it still follows a lot of the same logic. The CIA, 1945. This is America's spy agency. This is our people that we send out across the country and they spy. Their job is to look for threats, get information. This is the U.S. version of James Bond, although there's no such thing as a person like James Bond. Really, they're not all wearing tuxedos. They're trying to blend into nasty places. But that's what their goal is. They're trying to find information and often protect our information. And next lecture will be on the Korean War.